Thank you both so much. The first thing I want to reflect on, which we all know, but I think deserves to be said out loud, is what an incredibly vulnerable and intimate process we request of people who are joining this community. It is extremely intimate, right? When we think about what it is we ask people to do, I think this with our bar and bat mitzvah kids too, right? Who takes a 12 or 13-year-old and makes them do all this stuff in front of everyone they know? We do, because we feel that it has meaning, right? And that specifically in that moment where they are becoming a different person, that's specifically when we say, we want to focus on who you are now and who you are in this community. But it's a very vulnerable thing. And this is far more so. We are asking people to give a drop of blood, potentially from a genital area. We are talking about people taking off their clothes and immersing in water, potentially in front of someone they have never met. This is an incredible commitment and openness that people are willing to take on in order to make this journey. And so we need to take very good care of everyone who is willing to take that step. And of course, it just gets really complicated when we have people in a variety of ways, right? Trans and non-binary people are not the only ones who are not quite accounted for in the way we do things. People with certain kinds of disabilities, all kinds of things that we could begin to think of, right? It's not just us. But gender is encoded in such a specific way that the things that Dorian was saying, like the major anxieties that you had about this process, were all directly gender related. I have heard that 100 times. So I think that's really important for us as rabbis and people who shepherd people through this to realize, is that those things that may or may not be frightening to somebody else are highly likely to be concerning, or at least a question, to folks who are operating outside the gender binary. Thank God more and more of us are coming out. And my perception, and you can weigh in on this, our family belongs to Congregation Shar Zahav, which is a queer synagogue in San Francisco. Right now, the synagogue is overwhelmed with trans and non-binary people who are wanting to start on a conversion journey, and is actually struggling to figure out how to accommodate everybody with appropriate support. I have the sense, and I have zero statistics to be clear, but operating in queer community for a long time, that trans and non-binary people in particular have already broken out of something extremely powerful in order to even show up as a trans and non, right? You have already had to fight off immense amounts of people and ways and structures telling you not to do what it is that you need to authentically do. And so I think that there is an openness to growing into one's own person that actually brings some people into Judaism, because they have already said that so many of the ways that we all grew up didn't work, weren't right, were oppressive and constraining. And I think I think it is really valuable to appreciate that, in fact, as you said, some of that gender journey is actually how people end up with us, which is a great thing. It's a great thing that we want to support. And so a lot of what people bring is not only problems, questions, complications, but also an immense amount of strength about what it means to step into something quite frightening in order to live out what we understand that God has implanted in us. And that is a good thing that we want to celebrate. All that said, there are some really difficult things. It's really interesting how, for example, 20 years ago, 15, whatever, I've been really privileged because I was sort of one of the early loud people in this conversation. I'm gonna put it that way, early and loud, not the best, but early and loud. It meant that I have gotten emails, postcards, you know, from hundreds of rabbis and other guides, Jewish guides all over the world, asking all kinds of questions. people used to ask lots of questions about, oh my God, what do we do about the Hebrew name? This used to inspire a lot of anxiety. Interestingly, I don't get that one anymore. People have come up with some very interesting solutions, like so-and-so, me bait so-and-so, for example. Right, you're all nodding because a lot of people are familiar with this, which is wonderful. Like, we seem to be sort of moving through that particular piece that actually was people struggled with. People really struggled because we'd had Ben and Bot. And what do, right? With people who say that that doesn't respect me. So we seem to be moving through that. Let's be just open and honest about the fact that the certain things like mikveh, hatafat dam, those are body things. And we tend to freak out. I don't mean we, the Jews, I mean humans, right? And especially, we live in a American culture, and many of us have been here for multiple generations, that does not like acknowledging that we have bodies, right? It makes people nervous, and people have to talk about those things. So the first thing that I think is terribly important when we do have trans and non-binary people working with us, number one, there is no way to be prepared for every person that comes in. Just as there is no way to be prepared for anybody that comes in until you know them, because they're an individual creation of God who we don't know until we know. We do not. That's true of everybody. And I think what happens is that the anxiety of worrying about an identity and experience that we may be more or less familiar with sometimes results, and this is my observation from the questions that I receive. I have a trans person coming to immerse. What do? I don't know. What I can tell you is what to ask and how to respond, right? How to listen to the answer. That's really, and I think both of you reflected on that exact thing, right? You can't be prepared for all the kinds of trans people. I don't know, there's more every day. It's fabulous. I don't know what all the flags mean anymore. There's a lot of different ways that people identify, which is good. It means that we're suppressing people less. That's good. But it also means there's no way to be like, okay, now I have all the knowledge I need for when this person shows up. No, we don't. I don't. But I do think that because this process is so extremely vulnerable, this one in particular, right? It's very different than saying Shabbat Shalom as somebody comes in the synagogue door. For us, the rabbi, the guide, the teacher, whoever it is, to be the person who is the first to say, this is a complicated, vulnerable process. And Jews have been around for a long time, and not all of our rituals, processes, understandings are quite up to date yet with this. Like, I feel like it is a great gift for that to come from us, not to wait for someone to tell us they're uncomfortable, right? Let's not do that. Let's not wait until someone gathers to courage to actually come to us and say, I'm uncomfortable with this, right? That's a big deal. That's a big ask that we don't need to make, right? We can be the people to say, we know this is complicated, because we do. Intimate, vulnerable, the things that we ask are a big deal. What are your concerns? Do you have any concerns? Maybe they don't. Some people don't. Some trans women want to be treated like women. Whatever you do with the women, that's what I want you to do. Awesome. A lot of people are asking more complex questions now. I think one of the real blessings that certainly I have received from witnessing all these folks, I have probably been present for Hatafat done 10 different ways. And, I can answer specific questions, or we can chat at lunch about some of the real specifics of that. But the reason is because we had a long conversation about what that meant for them. What is that for you? What is important? Some people say, I think it's important to me to participate in the covenant of offering a drop of blood. For some people, that's the thing. For some people, having a witness for their mikveh that reflects their own gender identity is super important. I've gotten I did it last week, was called into a mikveh for that specific reason. I wasn't on the Beit Din, just showed up for that, which is something you can do and was mentioned earlier. For some people, that's super important. For some people, it may not be important. We don't want to assume any of these things, but we do want to acknowledge how much we're asking of people, and especially people whose experience is not codified thoroughly in the way that we have been doing things in the past. So I think that's really, really important. And most people, I think, when they are given permission to open up and say, yes, I actually am worried about this. I am confused about this. I'm not sure I feel safe getting into water with somebody watching me naked, right? Very valid things to say. That we're prepared for that, that we ask for that from them. I think that's probably the very best way we can let people know that we care about what happens to them, and that ultimately we're going to hear about a lot of halacha, right? We have these texts that are both wonderful and very challenging in a variety of ways. But I do think that, if we can be the people to say, we know this is imperfect, and we need to work with you to understand how to make this better and how to make this right for you. Ultimately, after all is said and done, my concern is that at the end of this process, people feel that the community that they have made so much effort to become part of cares principally about their dignity more than anything else. That is how I feel about it. Because if we're not caring principally about people's dignity, what are we doing exactly? And there is so much to be learned, right? Look at all these rituals. Is it a blood thing? Is it a genital thing? Is it a gender thing? This is a really interesting question. We would all grow and benefit from talking it through, right? When we start to say, like, all these questions that are coming to us and these wonderful new things that are arising, how do we as a community grow, right? Rather than resisting, how do we say, this is great? How do we get better from this? Thank you all so much. Thank you.